All right, see some more folks trickling in, getting a good group here. I hope everybody's Halloween is starting off nice and spooky or calm, depending on your preference. Just maybe give folks one more minute.
Aloha.
Aloha, good morning. Okay, well, just take 1 second to get settled with the WebEx. I know some of us might be more familiar with Zoom or Teams. I would encourage you all to change your first name and last name on the WebEx application. And you can use the grid view or the layout view. And in the bottom of your screen, you should be able to find the raise your virtual hand function. So just getting comfortable there. And we will get started. Pete, if you want to go to the next slide.
Yeah, and also just if you have any technical issues, please go to the chat and click direct message at the top and message Hawaii Public Utilities Commission. That's Mike Wallerstein. He can help you get those sorted.
Thanks, Pete. Okay, well, good morning, everybody. My name is Grace Ralph. I am the Chief of Policy and Research here at the PUC, and I'm just going to do a very brief welcome, but we have a great team of folks that are going to be helping to facilitate the meeting today, and really it's going to be a big team effort. So you'll meet a lot of the commission staff today, and you're welcome. We are just excited to have you and are grateful for your time here today. We know that this equity docket is extremely important. It's very important to the commission as well. And we are grateful for all the inputs that you all have provided already and look forward to having more of those going forward. We also know that this is a very challenging time for Hawaii and for a lot of the folks in our state. We wanted to recognize that, of course, this is likely a time that is very emotionally heavy for a lot of people who may have been impacted or have lost friends, family, loved ones in the recent fires on Maui. And so I'm actually going to turn the floor over to Dean Harvest, who is on the commission's compliance team, but also part of, he is a Hawaiian cultural practitioner. And we wanted to offer him a moment to provide us with a moment of aloha and to start our meeting that way, just recognizing that folks may be showing up with, you know, a lot on their mind, a lot on their hearts this morning. So Dean, I will pass it over to you.
Okay, hey, mahalo, thank you. And aloha everyone, aloha kako. What I'm going to do is offer a Hawaiian oli, the aloha oli, oli aloha. It speaks about coming together, gathering, with camaraderie, with love, with a mana'o, knowledge. And it is important that we leave our hakaka, our thoughts of other things that may burden us at this time, because with this message of aloha, we want to think about, like what Grace said, what has been going on. So I will opening with our oli aloha. Oh, na hunai da hala me hala uai hala te kua noi na ta noi. No ta noi ne noi ne ali ne. Aha ali ne ya hiki mai do tu hiki pulu me te roha. Aroi Arohe, arohe. Mahalo. Okay, Grace.
Mahalo, Dean.
Did you want me to do this or are you going to do that?
Yeah, please go for it.
Okay. In our meetings, we've always tried to reflect on the cultural part of Hawaii's past. And this Olelo no Iau, I came up, and it's one of many that it's been in our family that we recycle many times. And so the committee chose to select this one as our opening Olelo no Iau, which is Ohi Pau Ka'i Halau Ho'okahi, which can basically just be translated. One can learn from many sources. And being that said, Hawaiians did not just look to one source, but to everything that's around us. And that's all you folks. All you folks are our source. So please feel free to contribute, to express your opinion, to say something, to be involved in this meeting. With that, I say mahalo, ahui and aloha.
Mahalo, Dean. And Dean has also very kindly offered his expertise in this area. So if you have cultural questions that you want to pose or think through with him or other resources in his community, he has offered that as well. And just one other note, as you know, one can learn from many sources as we draw on that today. We have discussed with the Hawaiian Electric team that they'll be serving in an advisory role for these types of meetings or for this series of meetings. So they're going to help us understand their perspective on what really goes on internally in the request for proposal process and help us make sure that we're getting a full picture of their process and procedures and help us understand what is may or may not be possible or what we maybe need to consider to make things work. So just wanted to start with that, and now I will pass it over to the other meeting facilitators, Ashley and Eric. Thanks again, Dean.
Good morning, everyone. For those who don't know me, my name is Eric Sipper, and I'm at the commission. Myself and Ashley Norman will be facilitating the meeting today. Thank you for that introduction, Grace and Dean. So I'll start by just going over the agenda very briefly. We've now had our welcome and moment of aloha. Shortly, we'll have introductions and go over some ground rules. And then the bulk of the meeting today is going to consist of 2 different learning opportunities and then a group activity. So for the 2 learning opportunities, we're going to review the current request for proposals process, and then discuss possible solutions and discuss those. And then we'll be talking about some problem statements and really trying to get at the root of the current issues with the RFP and areas for improvement. We'll then close by discussing next steps. We have 3 more meetings that I'll talk a little bit more about briefly, and that's going to be our agenda for today. Next slide, please. So just to go over some ground rules for the meeting today, and I'll start with the 2 on the left. So as Dean said, we're hoping to hear from many different sources today. And to do that, we really want to make sure we're practicing democracy of time. So if you've been speaking quite a bit, please feel free to step back, let others' voices be heard. Similarly, if you haven't spoken much and you have something you'd like to share, please do feel free to share that either by unmuting yourself, by putting something in the chat. There is also a raise hand feature on WebEx. If anyone would like to try that out, please feel free to do so at this time. There will be several PUC employees monitoring both the chat and if anyone has their hand raised, and we'll really try and make sure that we get to you. Hand in hand with that is the need to respect and appreciate others' unique and lived perspectives. So we're all coming here from different places today. We really want to make sure that we treat everyone's perspective respectfully. And then to turn to the 2 things on the right. So we're really trying to find improvements to improve this upcoming IGP RFP that's coming up next year. And we'd like to hear a wide range of ideas. So you're really welcome to put out new creative ideas that push the envelope. And hand in hand with that is that we're going to be utilizing this bike rack. So if things are a bit outside of the scope of the meeting, it doesn't mean we're getting rid of them or ignoring them. We're going to keep track of them. All of this meeting is going to be documented by PUC staff. So whatever ideas you have, don't worry, we're going to get them down and make sure we have them. Next slide, please. So I've covered some of these logistical notes already. We'll be taking notes throughout the meeting. We won't attribute to them to you as an individual or as an organization, but we'll make sure we get everything down that's said, and those will be filed in the docket record, so you can look back on those. Also, we are recording this session, but we are going to have some breakout groups later. Those will not be recorded, so feel free to speak openly at those. And then again, as Pete said earlier, please reach out to Mike if you are having any technical difficulties. Here is his email address, or if you go under the chat feature, you can actually send a private message to Hawaii Public Utilities Commission, which is Mike, for this meeting. Next slide, please. So to give you a brief overview of where we are with the equity docket. So last month in September, we released this order setting out next steps for the docket. The two main portions of that order were, first, in response to all of the really useful feedback we got from everyone involved in the docket, we decided to focus more heavily on community engagement and outreach and really trying to get new voices in the room before focusing on some of the other tracks that are part of the equity docket. On the other hand, we know that we're finishing up the stage 3 RFPs, and there's going to be a new RFP process starting in 2024, often known as the IGP RFP process. So we really wanted to not pause that and wanted to really get everyone's information and knowledge to try to improve that RFP process. So that's the reason we started this 4-month-long set of meetings starting in October with today, and then we'll be having meetings in November, December, and January that will end up with suggestions or recommendations from the docket for the next RFP. To go back to what I was just saying before about having more community outreach and engagement, the PUC is in the process of procuring a local consultant to assist us with that. We do have to go through the state procurement process, which takes some amount of time. We're hoping for 3 to 4 months. So by the time we reach 2024, we will be relaunching the additional tracks. We'll have the outputs from this 4-meeting-long process, and we'll also be integrating the consultant into the equity docket. So that's where we are with the equity docket right now. Next slide, please. And I will now pass it over to my co-facilitator, Ashley.
Thank you, Eric, and good morning, everybody. This is an opportunity for us all to introduce ourselves. Feel free to use the chat function. You can just insert your name, your organization, and your role. Also, if there are any folks on the call that have not been to an equity docket stakeholder meeting previously that would like to introduce themselves in person, this is an opportunity for you to do that. You could raise your hand and we could call on you, or you could just jump in. Trying to look through. I know we have a whole lot of folks on the call today. So feel free to be putting in your name and your role and your organization in the chat. And I don't see any hands up. Maybe I'll give one more pause if anyone wanted to introduce themselves. Oh yes, Candler.
Yes. Good morning, everybody. My name is Candler Weinberg. I'm a first-year PhD student in the Urban and Regional Planning program at UH Manoa. My research focuses on the impact of natural disasters on marginalized communities, as well as nature-based solutions to disaster management. Kirsten Baumgartner, Baumgart-Turner, had invited me to be part of these meetings. I'm very thankful to be part of this and looking forward to helping however I can. Mahalo.
Welcome, Candler. Anyone else? Okay, well then feel free to continue to just add to the chat, and we can go ahead and keep moving. So next slide, please. Eric already touched a bit on the upcoming meeting schedules, but this is a little bit more detail for these 4 IGP RFP workstream meetings that we are planning. Today's meeting 1 will be it's a learning opportunity, education, and scoping is the focus today. The second and third meetings, which will be to be determined, but coming up in the next month or 2, we'll be talking more about that at the end of the meeting as well. We'll be focused on proposed solutions. CBPs are community benefit packages, and RFPs are requests for proposals. And again, you'll be learning a lot about both in the substance of the presentations today. But the next 2 meetings will be focused on proposed solutions for those proposal bid processes. The third meeting specifically will be more focused on community input and the RFP co-design. And then the final meeting, which will likely happen in January, will focus on prioritizing solutions and how we will move forward. Next slide, please. And to highlight the focus of our meeting today, the meeting objectives are in 2 streams. One is a learning opportunity, and the second is scoping. So our learning goals today are improved understanding of the RFP process, the procedural steps and timelines, identifying entities that are involved in the RFP process and their jurisdictions, and then discussing the RFP development and evaluation processes and sharing opportunities for public input on both. And secondly, for scoping, we will be reviewing the timeline of the equity docket discussion process to ensure a common understanding of the scope and possible outcomes. We'll be reviewing the solutions proposed to provide background and ensure a common understanding. This is an opportunity to solicit new ideas for solutions. And then lastly, to align on priority solutions to improve equity in future RFPs. Should also mention at the end of the meeting today, there will be a poll, and this poll will also provide you an opportunity to offer input on the meetings that we've proposed going forward on today's meeting, and some other details which we'll share at the end. And I think that's it for my part, so I turn it over to Pete.
Thanks so much, Ashley. So before we get into this learning opportunity on Hawaiian Electric's request for proposal process, I think I saw a question in the chat about what is IGP, and I think my colleague Eric answered that. But I just want to note, we do use a lot of acronyms in this world. Because we're focused on education here, I will do my best to define and make sure it's clear anytime I'm using an acronym what it means. IGP is the integrated grid planning process, for example, that Hawaiian Electric is using to plan for the long-term development of the grid in Hawaiian Electric or in Hawaii. But please feel free if there's anything you don't understand to put a question in the chat, and we will either answer that during the Q&A portion, or one of my colleagues will answer that while I am going over this presentation. So thanks again for that intro. Here we are going to be providing an overview of the request for proposal process, which I will be describing as the RFP process moving forward. I'll go over the purpose, the scope of the process, the stakeholder roles, what the typical timeline looks like for the RFP process with an example, as well as a bit more of a deep dive into the equity issues associated with this RFP process. I'll give a disclaimer up front that this presentation is from my perspective as commission staff, and is meant to be an introduction to the RFP process. It can be a pretty technical process, and I do not want to overwhelm everybody and cover every in and out of the process, but I will be highlighting the more important aspects of this process for this proceeding, which is focused on equity. And as Grace mentioned, we do have Hawaiian Electric available to help answer questions as well. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. My colleagues will document them so that we can address them at the Q&A portion or interrupt me if it's something to address immediately. Let's see. So the purpose of the RFP process is to procure system resources through competitive bidding. So this means that third parties, which are often called independent power producers, will provide proposals to Hawaiian Electric to meet the identified needs of an RFP, which might be energy, it might be capacity, it might be other system resources or services as determined by Hawaiian Electric. And this will, and Hawaiian Electric will evaluate these proposals based on a number of criteria, including the price of the project and other non-price criteria. This process is required for Hawaiian Electric. It can be very beneficial to ratepayers, providing a least cost market approach for procuring these resources and passing savings to customers when these resources come online. The recent rounds of procurements have had several solar plus storage projects, for example, with pricing that is much lower than the fossil fuel resources that are much lower than recent fossil fuel prices. And procurements are open to any technology that can meet the technical requirements, but recently these have generally delivered solar plus storage, and standalone projects. And I have this map on the right here from Hawaiian Electric's sustainability reports that showcases all of the resources on Oahu. Not all of these resources were procured through competitive bidding. A lot of the solar projects were, but generally all projects moving forward will be procured through this process. So moving into the scope of Hawaiian Electric's RFPs, I briefly mentioned that there are a variety of resources that can be procured. Today, we're going to be focusing on utility scale renewable resources, generally these large scale solar and large scale wind plants. There are other types of resources that I'll go over briefly. Grid services, this diagram, as an example I have, is for what is often called a virtual power plant or aggregated DER resources, where a company will basically manage the distributed energy resources like rooftop solar panels or batteries installed at customers' premises in a coordinated way to respond to certain events initiated by Hawaiian Electric where they need more energy or they need to reduce load on the grid in a cost-effective manner. There are other system resources that can be procured through this process. The example I have here is shared solar. And as I mentioned, today's focus is on utility scale renewables, and we're going to be using the Stage 3 RFP as sort of a reference point to describe some of the timeline and scale of this RFP process. So moving into the stakeholders in the RFP process, I've outlined 4 sort of broad general categories of stakeholders in this RFP process involved from the beginning of the development of the RFP materials through all the way to when the project is placed in service and comes online, delivering energy to Hawaiian Electric. And I'll go into more detail on each of these roles in the upcoming slides. So first we have us, the commission. We also are assisted often by the independent observer and independent engineer, which are independent entities that help the commission sort of monitor from a bit of a distance the RFP process and make sure the framework that the commission approves for how this process is carried out in terms of how the utility interacts with developers and what other community engagement processes and everything, to make sure that that's followed and really make sure that the process is fair. We also have the utility, Hawaiian Electric, which is responsible for quite a large role in the RFP process alongside developers. And I'll note, put a lot of logos for developers here. This is not me endorsing or the commission endorsing any of these developers or anything like that. I just was looking through a lot of the projects that have come online through procurement in Hawaii over the past few years and wanted to provide a few examples of developers here. And then we also have docket interveners and participants. I've only got the consumer advocate listed here because obviously they're pretty much required to play a role in the review of these PPA contracts and provide input. There, on a case-by-case basis, are always other interveners and participants active in the review of contracts that come out of this RFP process and helping the commission determine whether these projects are reasonable and in the public interest. And so as I go through these 4 categories, you may be wondering, there is one important stakeholder that it looks like I've left out here, and that is communities. And I'll note, certainly communities can play a role in the RFP process as docket interveners and participants. But as I'll discuss later, the role of communities within the broader RFP process is not super well defined in terms of what requirements there are to seek input or for communities to provide input into the RFP process, though there are several existing opportunities. So we'll discuss that in a bit more detail later. Just wanted to make it clear that communities do play a very important role in the RFP process, and that's what we're looking at, expanding and enabling through this series of meetings. So for Hawaiian Electric, in the interest of time, I will just briefly mention the roles of these stakeholders. So Hawaiian Electric plans for the resource needs and the materials that are submitted for bidders, for developers, and for the commission to review in terms of what energy and capacity needs are there for the grid based on analyses regarding, load changes, when fossil fuel resources need to be retired, several other considerations to determine when and what resources are needed, and then implements this RFP process, reviewing bids from proposers, evaluating them subject to predetermined criteria, and selecting projects that generally meets the criteria and are identified as the best among the projects to move into negotiating contracts regarding the term of the project length, the price that will be provided for energy, and quite a few other aspects of the project. And then this contract will be submitted as a PPA, a power purchase agreement. I'll be referring to this a few times. The PPA is basically just the contract between Hawaiian Electric and the developer outlining the terms of the project and the rates and other aspects of that and this is submitted to the commission for review. Other parties are able to participate in this review process and assist the commission with decision making. And then Hawaiian Electric may be involved in building the project, depending on whether there are certain interconnection facilities or whether the project is a self-build project from Hawaiian Electric, which is subject to additional stringent requirements to ensure the process is fair. The commission, I largely mentioned this, but the commission oversees and reviews the draft and final RFP, provides guidance to Hawaiian Electric regarding the scope of the RFP and specific RFP language. The commission will also review the PPAs or the contracts to determine whether they are reasonable and in the public interest. There are several statutory requirements involved within this review, including a focus on greenhouse gas impacts of the project. And the commission also focuses significantly on the pricing of the project. Following PPA approval, if that is the outcome of the dockets, the commission may monitor compliance with any conditions that were parts of the PPA and the development of the projects. Developers, sort of on the other side of Hawaiian Electric, submitting bids with detailed information regarding project site, land use, pricing, community benefits, other aspects. Following negotiating the contract and any PPA approval. The developer's major role is building the project, which includes quite a few steps I've listed here. And then sort of central to this entire process is engaging the community. And one of the major pieces of this, but certainly not the only piece, is developing community benefit packages, which we will discuss in more detail. And lastly, of these 4 categories, we've got docket interviewers and participants who may review and provide input on both the RFP process or the draft RFP materials and on the actual PPA contract once that is submitted to the commission for review within the docketed process. And this, while there are fewer bullet points here, I will note that participating in the docketed processes for reviewing the PPAs is not always a simple process and can be quite complex and quite technical, but is very important for the commission's review in determining that projects are reasonable and in the public interest. So back to the question of what
Pete,
about
if I could
communities?
just stop you for 1 second, maybe let's see if there are any questions at this moment, and then we'll dive back in. Any clarifying questions related to what's been presented so far? All right, Pete, we'll keep going then. We'll keep doing our best to answer questions in the chat.
Yes, and sorry, I can't see the chat while I'm presenting, so please just interrupt me if there are any important ones. Well, they're all important, sorry, if there are any urgent ones. So back to the question of what about communities and what is their role in this RFP process? So as you can see, there are several opportunities to provide input during the process, during Hawaiian Electric's planning for the RFPs, during community meetings hosted by Hawaiian Electric and or developers, participating in the docket PPA review, and then negotiating community benefits, including the packages and any other benefits with developers. And so while there are quite a few opportunities, what I'd like to point out is that the role here is not super well defined or necessarily required. Opportunities for input here often rely either on initiation by Hawaiian Electric and or developers, or by significant effort by the community where in cases where they may have felt that their voices were not sufficiently heard or addressed during this process. And so I guess I've put more of a fine point on this. If you sort of go back to some of the previous slides where I'm outlining the roles of other stakeholders, you could put the words required to in front of every action and it would still be true because this is what these stakeholders are required to do during the RFP process. But here you'd have to put something like communities are able to provide input, able to participate, able to negotiate. It's not necessarily a requirement. And I don't think this is always a bad thing. It can be a burden for communities if you impose a requirement to participate in the RFP process, which is, as I mentioned, can be very lengthy, very technical, even though it is super important. But we do want to enable communities and community members who do wish to participate and provide meaningful input into the process to do so. And so that's where there's this sort of balance between, enabling and requiring communities to participate in the process. And we'll sort of get into that in more detail later with the activity on problem statements. I think I did see a raised hand in the chat.
Yeah,
so
that was me.
Okay.
It's Robin Kay over on the island of Lanai. Could you or someone else just talk about that first bullet? Provide input during Hawaiian Electric's planning for RFPs. How does that happen? And you have some good examples of that?
Yes, so this can happen in a few different ways. The Hawaiian Electric, for example, right now in the integrated grid planning process, this is, planning for future resources, future procurements that will be needed for all 5 of Hawaiian Electric's service territories. Parties are able to participate in that process. There are quite a few public meetings where parties can learn more about the process. And I believe Hawaiian Electric has hosted several community meetings throughout the past 5 years in that process. In addition, there's also an open docket for specifically for the RFP processes where parties can intervene to provide input on, the needs and the scope and language in the RFP bids. Sorry, Henry will come to you in a second. And Hawaiian Electric also hosts meetings with communities to sort of solicit some input during the RFP process. Did that answer your question?
Sort of. Thank you.
Henry, did you have a question?
Yes.
Or comments?
The RFP docket 2017-0352, the PUC has explicitly stated that no one may intervene and no one may participate. Only the utility and the consumer advocate are parties.
Thanks, Henry. Did you have a question?
I question when you said become a party, because we're not allowed to become parties.
Yeah, Henry, I hear that that comment for sure, but just would note too that when the PPAs do come for review, that would be an opportunity for participation or intervention. And I think we are looking to potentially modify that process going forward, right? So something we can think about. Yeah.
After the RFP has been written and after it has been circulated and after a response has been filed and an individual docket is opened, then the community can intervene. And that is way too late, I think.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. And I think, that's something we're looking at here is where does it make most sense for folks to be able to provide input and when? So looking to make improvements.
Thanks. I will move to the next slide. So as I mentioned before, we'll use the stage 3 RFPs to give a more in-depth understanding of what the RFP process looks like right now. As Grace mentioned, we're looking at improvements to that process. So please continue to bring up additional ideas for how this can be improved. We're specifically looking at equity issues here within the scope of this work stream. So this is, there's a lot of numbers on this table. Let me give you sort of a overview of what this means. I just wanted to give you a better understanding of what the procurement scale looks like in a little more detail. So the table I have here outlines the targets for each of Oahu, Maui, and Hawaii Island in the stage 3 RFPs, noting that Lanai and Molokai have separate ongoing planning processes for procuring their resources. So these were, the stage 3 RFPs did not have targets for those two islands. In the second column, I have noted from Hawaiian Electric's annual RPS report, the renewable energy generation and total energy generation in gigawatt hours, which is just a term for the amount of energy generated, to be redundant, in 2022. So as you may know, Hawaiian Electric is required to sort of close this gap between the existing renewable energy generation and the total energy generation to reach the renewable portfolio standard mandate of 100% renewable energy by 2045 in 22 years. And I just wanted to give a comparison here with the current level of energy generation compared to what is targeted with the stage 3 RFPs. You can see it's a pretty large scale procurement for Maui and Hawaii, both targeting to nearly double or increase by 50% the current level of renewable energy generation. There are also targets for firm renewable capacity. And then on the right-hand column, just wanted to provide the operational dates for the resources that may bid into this stage 3 RFP. So it varies by island, but as you can see, these resources are intended to come on in the next 4 to 6 years and 10 years for some of the firm renewable capacity. So working through the timeline, I here's the timeline for the stage 3 RFPs using Oahu as an example. So this timeline is available on Hawaiian Electric's website, and I have a list of some of the helpful resources at the end of this presentation. So we first have, for the stage 3 RFP at least, we have the draft RFP filed, and the commission during this may provide guidance on some priority issues, including the capacity, the timeline, some definitions, and the RFP language. For this specific RFP, this is one of the community meetings I mentioned. Interested community members may attend these meetings and provide input and or note their concerns to Hawaiian Electric. There were 2 meetings during the stage 3 Oahu RFP process that were noted here. And then parties and participants were able to file comments on this following the community meeting. Following this, in the docketed RFP process, the commission hosted a technical conference to review priority issues and the community engagement of the RFP thus far, and then later issue an order on the draft RFP approving the language subject to some additional modifications, which was then filed at the end of last year. Next, we move into the process after the final RFP is issued, where developers, what are called IPPs here, I mentioned independent power producers. These are the developers, the proposers of projects, bid in, and the review, evaluation, and selection of projects to determine the final award group, who then move into contract negotiations, are determined. The commission generally takes a bit of a step back during this RFP process while the IO and IE participate. It's important to note the commission is still monitoring the process. Developers during this process may reach out to communities that would be impacted by their proposed projects, but I have underlined may here to make it clear that there may be still some issues with how this works in process and whether this is required or not. I also wanted to provide just a few definitions here, and the slide deck will be posted. Just to clarify, as I mentioned, we use a lot of acronyms here, and they can be quite confusing. So IPP is the independent power producer, which is the technical term for developers used in this process. BAFO is the best and final offer, which is an opportunity for developers to revise their offer or revise their bid based on sorry. And then finally, the IRS is the interconnection requirement study, which is an engineering study, a technical analysis to determine what interconnection facilities will be required for each project selected in the final award group and who may be responsible for those, and some other in-depth analysis of the project's impact on the grid. So after this RFP process, after contract negotiations, Hawaiian Electric will submit PPAs that are signed by the developer and Hawaiian Electric, and PPA stands for Power Purchase Agreement, to the commission for review, detailing the terms of the developer selling energy from the project to Hawaiian Electric. Parties may intervene and participate in this process to ask questions, solicit inputs, and provide their position and recommendations to the commission. Once the commission, if the commission approves the project, which approval can come in several forms and can include conditions on the project, the developer will commence construction of the project, including any interconnection facilities. And this construction process can take several years, which the commission will monitor throughout. So moving more into some of the equity issues of this process, I'd like to talk a little bit more about what community outreach is required in the RFP process. So during the RFP bid evaluation, there are 2 sets of criteria that Hawaiian Electric look at when evaluating a project: the price criteria and then the non-price criteria. There are 11 non-price criteria in the stage 3 RFPs, of which one of them, the first one, is community outreach. And so there's quite a bit about requirements in the and for community outreach in the RFP, I just provided a short list of some of the community outreach plan requirements that each proposer is required to provide more detail on. And the one I'd like to focus on here is the community benefits package. There are other aspects that are important to review for the community outreach plan. I think the community benefits package is the most pertinent for this discussion. So to give a little bit more information about community benefits packages, this is a new requirement to the Stage 3 RFP, and it requires developers to provide at least $3,000 per megawatt, so the size of the project, per year of the project's lifetime for community benefits. This $3,000 is sort of baked into the PPA price, so it ultimately comes from all ratepayers sort of socialized for the impacted communities' benefits for hosting the project in their community. Developers must consult the host community and address specific needs that are identified by the host community for these CBPs. And during bid evaluation, preference is given to projects with larger amounts or other benefits like local employment, prevailing wages, improvements to infrastructure. And I'll also note that this $3,000 per megawatt amount was initially determined for the Stage 3 RFP as proposed by Hawaiian Electric, with some review and comments by stakeholders, and ultimately slightly adjusted by the Commission for the Stage 3 RFP process. And just to give an example of how much this could be for a specific project, I'll use the Mililani 1 solar project, which, because this was, I believe, part of the Stage 1 RFP, was not subject to these requirements, but for a project that was this size, which was 39 megawatts, this requirement would be at least $117,000 per year for the 25-year lifetime, would result in a total of about $3 million in community benefits throughout the project's lifetime. So, as I noted, the CBPs are new to the Stage 3 RFP process, and with all new processes, will likely require some adjustment moving forward. And so as we look towards these adjustments, I just wanted to note some of the questions that we're looking at that may be appropriate for the group to look at in this series of meetings to assess how we can adjust this aspect of the RFP process. First, is $3,000 per megawatt per year the right amount for these packages? Should there be other sort of requirements other than the monetary benefit? When are these finalized in the RFP process? And is this early enough for the Commission to review, for parties to review in decision making? How can the Commission enforce these packages and verify that the project benefits are going to some of the most needed projects in the impacted communities, and going to the right community if there is a right community? Who decides, on the question of if there is a right community, who decides which communities negotiate with developers to determine these packages? And then more on like the project ownership, what happens if project ownership changes? How does that change the CBP process and annual or upfront donations moving forward? Should these developers provide benefits via annual payments or a one-time upfront payment when the project comes online? And what happens to annual benefits when the PPA contract term ends if the PPA is not renewed and the project goes offline and the site is returned to pre-project conditions? So this is not a comprehensive list of issues to address and develop moving forward. Just wanted to get the ball rolling on the group thinking about how we can improve this process for communities moving forward. And so looking forward at the integrated grid plan RFPs, this is the next round of RFPs that we're hoping this process can develop recommendations to improve community engagement, equity, and benefits. And the scope has not fully been determined, but procuring resource needs that have been identified in the integrated grid planning process that I had mentioned has really been a 5-year process to determine some of these needs through a rolling process, which by rolling process, I mean issuing new RFPs on a regular sort of rolling schedule. The timeline for this is per some of Hawaiian Electric's indication is that the draft RFPs are intended to, Hawaiian Electric intends to file the draft RFPs in this coming April, the final RFPs this coming September, and then have projects come online sometime in the 2028 to 2030 timeframe, or 2035 for long-term projects, which by long-term projects here, I mean projects that have a much longer lead time to develop. One common example is offshore wind, but I'm sure there are other examples as well. And these RFPs will include some modifications. I've included just 2 here that are by no means comprehensive or final. As you can see in the timeline, the draft RFPs have not been filed yet. The commission has not issued any decisions on this RFP. But one is using the new renewable energy zone concept that was developed in the integrated grid plan, or alongside the integrated grid planning process, to identify preferred siting areas for new resources. I have a few slides on this in the appendix, as well as incorporating recommended improvements to community engagement and benefits from this workstream. Henry, I see your hand up. Do you have a clarifying question?
Yes, I know in the IGP process, renewable energy zones have been identified, but has that concept actually been approved by the commission?
The commission has not issued a decision on the renewable energy zones or on the broader IGP plan.
Thank you.
Okay, and that about wraps it up for my presentation on the RFP process. I think I saw quite a bit of comments while I was going, so hopefully I was able to provide a good overview here. These are some other helpful resources that I encourage you to look through as well regarding this sort of massive scale issue of procuring renewable energy resources to meet the state of Hawaii's needs as we move towards a 100% renewable energy system in the next few decades. And I will wrap it up there. And I believe I have a slide for questions. So let's see, Grace or Mike, are there?
Maybe
assume there are some
time-wise, Pete,
questions.
let's take like 1 or 2 questions right now, and we'll continue to try to answer things in the chat. But if we don't get to your question in the chat, please know we are going to download that and we can follow up offline too, but we'll do our best here. Yeah, and maybe we can take 2 or 3 questions.
So are we taking any questions from the chat, or if anybody would like to raise their hand?
Yeah, if anybody wants to raise their hand, I think we have time for 1 or 2 sort of verbal questions. Well, maybe they're not. Oh, go ahead, Kapua.
Hi, this is Audrey Newman from Molokai. Thank you so much for this presentation. It documents in its full beauty the complexity of the RFP process, and I think it also documents how difficult it is for for communities to meaningfully engage, and how difficult it is for the PUC to just sort of tweak this process to change that. So I just applaud everybody for taking this on. And this is just a suggestion, Mike, Grace, Pete. I wonder if it would be worthwhile for you guys to pull together a small working group who could outline a process from the community's perspective, right? A process that would work for the community, and then you can kind of, because it's more than just plugging community into this existing system, and the community benefits package is so small compared to the issues, the integrated issues that most communities have. So I don't know how we get from here to where you want to be. So just wanted to make that suggestion and share that perspective.
Thanks, Audrey. I appreciate that perspective. We'll definitely note that suggestion down. And I think that somewhat aligns with one of the recommendations from the Energy Equity WHOI's comments on our alternative RFP design. And we've noted that as one issue to dive into much more deeply in this series of meetings. I think initially we have scoped that for the third meeting, but that can definitely change as we get feedback from folks. Okay, so I see a few other hands. Kapua?
Mahalo. Question is pretty much the equity. Where is the equity if the community cannot intervene before the contract is negotiated? Especially for those communities like Waianae and Kahuku that have been already overburdened, that have energy projects that we wouldn't want anywhere, especially to have the windmill so close to schools and a community. So I like Henry, and I do agree that we need to have the engagement, a favorable engagement before the contract is negotiated, or to have some type of presets that the community will and will not accept. I think that's very important before so. And like Audrey, I do appreciate the PUC in taking this bold move forward on behalf of the communities and trying to make it more fair for all. Mahalo.
Thank you for that suggestion. If I can just restate it, it sounds like your suggestion is incorporating some sort of requirements or built-in process for communities to interact with Hawaiian Electric or the developers before the RFP is finalized and before the contracts are finalized.
It's 11 o'clock. Correct. Because some of our communities, we have pretty much defined what we would like, and we do need to go further out into the community as what other community voices would like to contribute as well. But I think that's an important piece to put in prior to negotiation. Otherwise, I fear that we're still going to be stepped on again, in spite of these benefits that have been identified. I don't think it's enough.
Thank you.
When referring to equity, we recognize that not all communities can host these sites, but they can do other things to contribute to carrying the load. Mahalo.
Thanks. Grace, I know we have 4 or 5 other hands raised. Just in the interest of time, should we ask those folks to comment their questions or just write them down and ask
Yeah,
them?
I think that makes sense, Pete. And I just want to note too, this is definitely not folks' only opportunity to ask questions and get clarity. But yeah, let's collect those in the chat. We'll try our best to answer those that way. And if they don't get answered, then we can follow up with that later. But I think so the next portion of the meeting will focus on what we think we might be able to do in this particular process to address a lot of these questions that you all have, these great suggestions. So this is really intended to be just a preview of some ideas that we have that we are thinking we might be able to discuss and come up with some recommendations with over the course of these 4 meetings. By no means are these exhaustive or, the only ones we can look at. We are going to solicit your ideas and feedback, but these are some ideas that we've already heard from comments and letters in this docket and that we know have been issues kind of throughout the RFP process. So the 4 that we are kind of contemplating as a good starting point and welcome your feedback on are 1, community benefit packages, 2, the criteria that Hawaiian Electric is using to evaluate the developer's bids, 3, public participation and community participation in the RFP process. So a lot of discussion around that already. And 3, this maybe larger scale idea of alternative RFP design. Audrey, I think, that one might get to your point too of how can we sort of re-envision the RFP process with communities. And again, I want to note that this particular process is intended to help improve the IGP RFP, that near-term solution, more near-term solutions, but we want to capture ideas that we can address down the line when we have a little bit more time and that we can think more holistically about. So if you could go to the next slide, Pete. Great. So just briefly, I think Pete touched on this very well, so I won't spend a lot of time on this slide, but community benefits packages are required to be a part of the stage 3 RFP proposals. As Pete mentioned, the developers are required to provide at least $3,000 per megawatt per year for projects in that process. And Hawaiian Electric's RFP has a number of clear requirements for what the community benefit package must include. So the funds must be donated to actions or programs to address a very specific community need. They must be made public on the developer's website. The developers must clearly document how they have consulted community to develop this, how they will distribute the funds and are distributing the funds, and how those funds directly address a community need. When Hawaiian Electric is scoring proposals, they do give preference to bids with a larger dollar amount going towards community benefits packages, those that create local jobs and pay prevailing wages for construction workers, and for those that improve community infrastructure. So this is really a high-level overview. Again, next meeting or in our coming series of meetings, we'll dive really into the details of these if that's aligned with the group's direction and get more into that. But I just wanted to give sort of like a high-level overview of the current state. If you could go to the next slide, Pete. So some possible solutions, I think Pete raised some good questions earlier, but we've also already heard some possible solutions from comments in this docket and in historical experiences as well. So 1, we can review in depth Hawaiian Electric's requirements for the developers' community outreach plans and their benefits packages and help identify improvements. A couple of initial ideas would be to post the requirements for community outreach planning and benefits packages very publicly on Hawaiian Electric's website, make them a little more accessible to understand how they're evaluating those. One of the ideas proposed in comments in this docket was to include a compensated community-based organization for that community outreach piece of the project development. Another one was to I liked this innovative ideas to encourage co-creation of community engagement with schools, with our keiki, and having them to go out and survey their grandparents, their aunties, their uncles, their communities, and help get input from their communities that way. As Pete mentioned too, we think there could be opportunities to improve the enforceability or oversight of community benefits packages via maybe a more official agreement. And then we could also explore some co-creation ideas and participatory budgeting approaches to developing the community benefit packages. There was also an idea to have the PUC do listening sessions and focus groups, which is definitely something we can explore. Next slide. So another proposed sort of solution set that we think we might look at are the bid evaluation criteria that Hawaiian Electric uses. And I think I'm seeing a lot of comments from this on this topic from Henry in the chat. So Henry, welcome your input on this going forward. Again, we're going to dive into the details of these solutions at the coming meetings, but there are different criteria that Hawaiian Electric uses to evaluate bids. There are threshold criteria, which means that if the developer has not met that, they do not consider the proposal. Two of those that are particularly relevant for this include a community outreach plan and an assessment of the cultural resource impacts of the project. And we can go into details, or I can answer questions about that as well. But another piece of this is the non-price criteria. And the scores for each proposal on this are worth 40% of the proposal overall. They're scored between 1 and 4 and then weighted across the across different metrics. There are 11 total non-price criteria, including community outreach and cultural resource impacts. If you go to the next slide. Some possible solutions here would be one to change the weighting of the non-price criteria. So maybe make that a 50-50 between price and non-price criteria. We could modify the existing non-price criteria. So make local job creation its own category or inputs into the local economy as a new non-price criteria. We could explore adding bonus points if the project site is farther from existing or past energy infrastructure in communities with, you know, higher incomes or kind of priority sites. There was an idea proposed in the docket to score projects well that have dual use. So maybe the land is also used for agriculture or shades for a playground or has some other dual use. And then there are some new innovative ideas as well that might give preference for a shared ownership model that allows the community to own part of the project or prefers local businesses. Or we could award points for extraordinary resilience measures and safety. And I see some questions in the chats. What I'm providing here is very much not a comprehensive overview of how Hawaiian Electric is scoring their bids, but I just pulled out some pieces that I thought were particularly relevant to this conversation. But again, we can go into more detail on that in future meetings as well. Next slide, Pete. So another idea is, you know, looking at how and when communities give input into the RFP. We actually worked with some consultants last year from the national laboratories to help us identify where we might be able to do that. And this slide shows maybe the current state, as Pete was mentioning, that, you know, there are kind of limited opportunities for public comment and input into the RFP process. If you go to the next slide. We could definitely add some steps. This is not intended to be a proposal here, but just meant to illustrate that we could add steps to more formally incorporate public comments or community engagement and community input. And again, you'll see an idea for really community input right at the top here in public education. Go to the next slide, Pete. Finally, I think this is an idea that was raised by the Energy Equity Hui in the docket, was to explore alternative RFP design solutions. I think, you know, this might fall into that category of like a longer term proposal, but I'm interested in exploring with you all whether we might be able to pilot some approaches. For example, I think we heard that there was an idea for co-creation of an RFP with community, where the utility would spend a year working with the community to co-create and develop what it's looking for, and then work on the technical side of things and acquire land and grid needs, and then have another 3 months for community approval of that RFP. So that's sort of like an alternative way, whereas currently the utility really, develops RFP, this would try to look at co-creation with community. Another idea proposed was developing a community energy board to help oversee and give input into this process overall. So again, these are some of the ideas we're thinking about exploring in more depth in our coming meetings. Again, very much not exhaustive, and we look forward to your ideas and input on these, which we will solicit at the end of the meeting. I am going to, I think, turn it over to our facilitator, Janelle, who is going to bring us into our problem statement activity.
Great. Thank you, Grace. Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Wilson. I am from RMI. I introduced myself earlier in the chat, but nice to meet many of you. I'm excited to be in this conversation with you all. So Grace just provided an excellent start to this conversation, Grace and Pete together, by talking about the current process and by talking about the potential solutions that are within scope for this set of interim discussions between now and the beginning of calendar year 2024. But since now that we're oriented to the process and to the potential solutions that are within scope, I would like us to take a step back for just a moment so that we can orient ourselves and collectively align on the problem or sets of problems that we together attempt to solve through these interim discussions on equity solutions for the IGP RFP process. So this session that we're about to start will be an opportunity to hear from and learn from other stakeholders about the equity related challenges in the RFP process and why it matters to them. And the reason that we do this is that by orienting ourselves in the problem and the problems that are most important to us as a collective, we can then prioritize the solutions that are most appropriate to solving the problems that we care about the most. So the PUC shared a problem statement, activity and pre-read that I am posting in chat right now. In that pre-read, the commission invited stakeholders to come prepared to share their unique perspective on the problems that IGP or RFP discussions should be focused on solving for. However, as has been mentioned at the start of this call, I want to reiterate the scope of problems we're attempting to solve through these collaborative discussions are necessarily limited because this process is focused on piloting solutions for a single near-term solicitation, the IGP RFP. Our focus here today is on incremental solutions that can improve the outcome for the IGP RFP. So complete overhauls and time-intensive revisions to the RFP process may not be feasible to explore within these discussions, but will absolutely be within scope to be considered at a later time when the siting and hosting track of the equity docket is in full swing. So we also need to think about problems that are really feasible and central to the commission and the utility's ability to address. I've already heard a lot of great problem statements heard and seen in chat. A lot of really excellent problem statements that are appropriate for this conversation. So we want to center ourselves in problem statements that are within the commission's ability to control or influence, and or those that are within the utility's ability to implement or pilot. So problem statements that are beyond that scope, we're going to be intentional about setting them aside for later evaluation and potential consideration as the siting and hosting track begins in earnest in 2024. So time is not going to permit us to consider modifications to ongoing RFPs or to energy projects that are already further along in the development process. So just am offering that reminder of the scope here as we transition into sharing and our collective ideas about the problems that we should be oriented to solving. So I want to ask quickly, maybe Pete, you can stop sharing your screen for just a moment. I'd like to see a show of hands. Have folks had a chance using your raise your hand feature? Can you raise your hand if you have had a chance to review this PUC pre-read and do the suggested activity? Okay, I'm seeing a few raised hands. Thank you, folks. All right, well, I'm seeing a few raised hands, but it's still probably a minority of the participants today. So I'd like to make space for a little bit of independent journaling so that folks can come into breakout discussions, which are going to be set up in just a moment, with their ideas about problem statements at hand. So I'm going to give you maybe, let's say 3 minutes to journal. So at 11:20, we're going to come back together. So I'll invite you to click on the link that I shared in chat and to look at the draft problem statement that the commission has articulated and to think like, are there any questions about that problem statement or refinements you might make? Or are there any questions or root causes that you'd like to identify that maybe are contributing to those problem statements? So with that, I will stop talking and let people journal independently for a second.
Did we lose audio?
Hi, Dean. No, we are just giving people a moment to finish journaling up their last thoughts about problem statements.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jim.
Yeah. Appreciate the journaling live in chat. That's super helpful. I'm going to give folks 1 more minute to wrap up what they're working on. Okay, great. Well, I know that that was short, but I hope that that moment to journal and reflect on problem statements was at least generative or starting to be generative for you. So we're going to take what you were thinking about and mulling over individually, and we're going to transition into a space of sharing and listening to others. So in a few moments, you'll be transitioned into a breakout room to share your thoughts about a problem statement the group should embrace and orient itself towards solving. And in each breakout room, there will be two PUC staff persons who will be present. They'll be there to facilitate the conversation and ensure that everyone has an opportunity to share with our limited time together. And then second, they'll be there to document and to show on the screen how your version of the problem statements are being captured. So they'll be note taking and sharing their screen so that you can see how your perspective is being factored in. So please hold close in your mind going into these breakout conversations our group norms around democracy of time and sharing your perspective, respecting the perspective of and lived experience of those others in the space. So as you go into the room, you'll be invited to popcorn around and share one problem statement and maybe one thought about root causes that is central to the problem statement and is important for the group to consider. So after everyone has a chance to share, the facilitator in your room will ask you to reflect and discuss what similarities and differences between problem statements that you're hearing from others and yourself in the breakout room discussions. So before we transition into breakout rooms, is anyone holding any questions about what we're doing? Okay, I don't see any raised hands. So I'll just, as a reminder to the facilitators, we'll be in breakout rooms for 15 minutes. So when a 5-minute reminder is sent, please make sure that you have helped the group transition into a reflection of similarities and of differences in the problem statements you're hearing and have shared together. And then when we come back to plenary, please make sure that there's one person who's identified who's willing to very quickly and succinctly in less than a minute summarize the key differences and themes that and similarities that were elevated in your breakout room. I think we're good to go.
Thanks, Janelle. I'll be setting up the breakout sessions now. Thanks.
Thank you. See you in breakout rooms.
Please let me know if you're having issues accessing any other breakout sessions.
Hello again, folks. Hope you had a productive conversation in your breakout rooms. We're just going to give folks a minute to get back into this plenary session, and then we'll share back out.
Okay, welcome back to plenary, folks. I think I see that a majority of folks are back in the room, but I'm just quickly checking our participant list. Okay, it looks like we've mostly come back from breakout rooms. So I hope that those conversations were really generative. I can say, speaking for our breakout room, we had a lot of really great additions and builds on the problem statement that are within scope. So I'm excited to hear the results from other breakout rooms. So we have just a few minutes to share. And so I'd like to invite a volunteer. We probably actually won't have time to hear from all breakout rooms, just given the amount of time remaining with our hour. So I will invite maybe 2 to 3 breakout rooms to raise your hand, and then we can hear your report out. Dee, I see your hand raised first. Take it away.
Yeah, I put our breakout room comments in the chat, and I'll start by reading off after mine. One was, how are the official neighborhood boards regarded as representatives of the community by the affected communities? Another was hazardous waste exposure versus habitability as a safety issue. Another was waste management and energy production are connected when incinerators are proposed as sources of energy. Communities have to respond multiple times to efforts to incinerate waste. So overall, in sum, the 2 main issues are community empowerment and safety.
Thank you so much, Dee, for sharing out. Community empowerment and safety is definitely a theme that resonated in my breakout room as well. Do I have a volunteer for another share out from a different breakout room? I am not seeing any raised hands, but that may be a user error on my end. I'll invite my PUC colleagues to let me know if there's someone else who's raised their hand.
I've raised my hand.
Okay, go ahead. Thanks, Sebastian.
Hello, everyone. In my group, we talked about meaningful participation in the process, but also defining community better, defining consensus better, and also nothing can replace just the thorough community engagement process. And also, in terms of problem statements, There was also mentioned the cost of capital can be high, considering current events. And I think just improving the energy democracy methodologies overall in an empirical way that reduces ambiguity.
Lovely. Thank you so much, Sebastian. I think there is Dennis next, who's raised his hand or their hand.
Wonderful, thank you. So sharing for breakout 3, a lot of great problem statements ranging from having the community benefit package funded by ratepayers. They'll distribute to small groups. Community benefits, why isn't the burden being shared? Lack of partnering with community organizations. Lack of messaging for the community as to what's in it for them. Why should they get involved? And a lack of community involvement in the process because the community doesn't have power to drive the process. The community is just kind of inflected at certain points in the process rather than holistically throughout it. One of our big commonalities was the need to create a group that could come together as a whole rather than on an individual RFP basis, a group that maintains connectivity throughout and kind of as a one-stop shop for any community group that wants to get involved or wants to find out what is happening, one spot to go to, and then maybe below that there's RFP involvement in individual processes, but an overall group for community involvement to be involved and to find out what's happening. Mahalo.
Thank you, Dennis. That was excellent. And again, I heard a lot of common themes from my breakout room. I think we have time for 1 or 2 more breakout rooms to share. And Sebastian, I think you still have your hand raised, but I'm not sure if you'd like to add something new or if that's okay. Seeing your hand down now. Okay. I am not seeing any further hands raised.
Janelle, I think we've got 2 hands raised.
Okay, thank you. I apologize. I'm
No worries.
new to the WebEx software. Whose hand is raised next?
I see Don Rudney, and then after that is Cam Black.
Lovely. Thank you, Don. And then up next we'll have Cam.
Is anyone else not hearing Don?
Yeah, I'm not hearing Don yet either.
Don, maybe we'll go to Cam and see if we can get your audio issues fixed in the meantime.
So we echoed the community empowerment theme on deciding what the benefits should be and getting community input again on whether it's increased rooftop solar, lower power bills, or increased efficiency measures, informing the community as to the overall energy efficiency efforts that are taking place to minimize additional generation. We also talked about embedding environmental justice somehow into the bidding process and scoring process. We also talked about benefits directly to Native Hawaiian communities, perhaps through Hawaiian homelands as a model on the continental US. We also talked about siting where it shouldn't go, possibly in already overburdened communities, and maybe where it should, possibly near the load centers, and also lowering barriers for community-based developers to actually have a level playing field to compete against the big developers as far as building projects. So thanks to the group. It was a good discussion. Hopefully I captured everything.
Thank you to Cam. That was an excellent report out. Okay, with that, I'm afraid we're running low on time, and so I may invite anyone else who would like to share a reflection from their breakout room. If you can type that into chat so we can have that saved for posterity's sake. And I'm gonna paste into the chat 2 reflection questions that I'll invite folks to respond to in chat. And if you can enumerate your responses with a number 1 or a number 2 so that it's clear which question you're responding to, that would be tremendously valuable to the commission and staff as they are dissecting and synthesizing all the great feedback you all have to offer. So the first question for you all to consider is reflecting on the problem statements that have been surfaced by participants today. Which of the solution areas do you think will be most important to focus on and explore together in the next few months? And you can think about this question through the lens of which area or solution area are you most interested in supporting, and would you like to see, do you have the most energy to support? And the second question is, what do you need and or what can you offer to support stakeholders and the commission in exploring solutions that address one or more of the problem statements that have been surfaced today? So I'll give everyone a chance to silently journal and type in your responses to one or both of these questions in chat. And then if we have a minute or two, we can hear from a volunteer who'd like to share their perspectives. Great. So I'm seeing a few responses so far in the chat. There's a lot of interest so far in co-designing RFP processes and working towards a model of co-creation. I see some interest also in bid evaluation criteria. So that's exciting. Love it. Sebastian, you offer an interest and enthusiasm in building out energy democracy methodology, definitions, and metrics. That would be super exciting. I think there would be lots of interest based on my breakout room discussion in co-creating metrics that can be piloted in the IGP RFP process. Is there anyone who would like to come off mute and share their response to one or both of these questions verbally? Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm seeing an offer of support from Audrey to think about the Molokai lessons learned and piloting community design in an RFP. I'm sure that that will be of a lot of interest to folks in this call. Thank you, Audrey. So with an eye towards closing this activity, I just want to provide a heads up or an indication of where this is going. So we spent this time thinking about problem statements today. As a next step, the commission will be thinking about synthesizing all of the rich ideas and perspectives about problem statements going forward and to support discussions in meetings 2 and meetings 3. And so the problem statement that is the synthesis of your input and feedback today will be the basis for thinking about, okay, how does the solution that we're considering here support and address solving the root problem that we've identified together. So that's where we're heading with this problem statements. And so as part of the notes document and report out of the chat, a synthesis of this problem statement discussion that we've had today. So thank you all for your contributions and your perspectives and being sharing those perspectives. And so with that, I will hand it back to Eric or Ashley to close us out.
Hello again, everyone, and thank you so much for leading that activity, Janelle, and thank you to everyone for your participation. Just to go over some housekeeping before ending for the day. We will be setting a date in the coming weeks for our second meeting, which will be in late November. There will also be a mid-December meeting and then a late January meeting. Please keep an eye out for any pre-reads or activities to complete before the future meetings. This really helps us to have a productive discussion once we're all here and really dive into the details immediately. If you haven't already signed up for the email list for the docket, please do so. That's available on the equity website, which has been put in the chat several times, and I can put it in the chat again before we finish, or one of my colleagues can. Again, this is an ongoing docket. Public comments can be submitted at any time. Please feel free to reach out to commission staff to submit public comments, to keep participating in a variety of ways, both in and outside of meetings. And then just to give a little preview, we're hoping that outputs of this work stream will result in something like staff recommendations. It could be party proposals or some combination, but we're really open to ideas as well as what potential outputs could look like. Next slide, please. We're also going to have a post-meeting poll, and we can make sure we put this link in the chat as well. This is really trying to get a sense of preferred times for future meetings, additional ideas, feedback on these potential outputs we just mentioned, and any additional feedback on the meeting. And if everyone could complete that by Friday, November 3rd, that's really going to give us a lot of info on how to move this docket forward in the most effective and most engaged way possible. Next slide. All right, with that, we'll finish. Mahalo, everyone. I hope everyone has a fantastic, happy Halloween. Thank you all again so much for taking the time to join us today, for coming with so many wonderful ideas, and we really look forward to continuing this process with all of you. Thank you again and have a fantastic day.
I'll also just